It's good evening from the UK. Just to let you know, we're in Birmingham. So I'm thinking 8 hours. So it's good morning or good afternoon to Rebecca and Stephen. Is it morning or afternoon?
It is good morning.
Morning. Thank you very much. Thank you for confirming the time. Just to let you know, it is beautiful sunny evening here. And what I'm looking forward to, and by the way, we're not going to rush this. I've ordered a pizza. So I think when we finish...
Only if you're willing to share.
Well, there's a lot of things you can do digitally, but unfortunately, I think that's the one thing. So, so listen, thank you for joining me. It's a bank holiday here, so we're quite chilled out in the UK. We've got quite a long, what we call long extended weekend. But I was fascinated by your book, and we'll go into that and who you both are. Stephen and Rebecca. It's a book called Incredible Communication. So we're going to be talking about the importance of communication. But let me first tell everybody who's listening in and watching in who you both are. So Stephen is a communication strategist, extensive background in training corporate leaders on their presentation skills. And we'll chat about that later and the importance of that. You've worked with NBC, Universal, Warner Brothers, Verve Mobile, Paramount, Fox. Interestingly, I come from a music background, and so I dealt with Universal, Warners, and totally different guys. So I can see the kind of people you've dealt with, which is interesting. Rebecca, an expert in strategic communication, leadership and organizational communication, a clinical professor of communication, and a director of the master's program at USC. I think it's Annenberg School of Communication. Apologies if I misread that. And of course, a bit like Steve, you deal with many clients across many sectors, including infrastructure publishing, which I find interesting because we also publish a magazine called Business Influencer, aerospace and automotive. So good evening to you both, or good morning from where you are. So I'll tell you why I was intrigued. Let me just give you a bit of a quote from the Harvard Business Review. Influence is one of the most important competencies of leaders in the 21st century. How well a leader can influence is crucial to that leader's effectiveness, as well as his or her organizational success. Like all communication, we influence most effectively when we pay careful attention to how our influence is received. Now, we are surrounded by great communicators from history. The world is littered with them. And of course, we're talking about people like Obama, who was a great orator. Question is, does that make him a great leader? We are in uncertain times with war raging across in Europe. So Winston Churchill comes to mind. He was a great communicator. Talking about war, a great leader, apparently a great communicator, but not one to shout about, Adolf Hitler. And of course, when you go into the world of commercial and enterprise, then Steve Jobs comes to mind, because he was also a great communicator. But of communication, of course, is more than just presentation. And that's what I'd like to explore with you both. So my first question, really, I know you both come from a comms perspective, but why did you choose to suddenly write the book? And my guess is, having read it, you mentioned COVID a few times. So what and who influenced you or led you to write the book?
So actually, COVID had nothing to do with the writing of the book. And in fact, we did everything we could not to put in so much about COVID, because we are all hoping and praying that we will be beyond that soon enough. The book actually started about 3 years ago with the title Incredible Communication, because at the time when I was thinking about putting something together, I felt like we were in a credibility crisis. I felt like black was white, up was down. We were buying into theories and people, without mentioning names, that were just completely throwing us off of what we believe to be the truth. And from that point, it was, okay, I started to look at the work that I had done in documentary production, working with celebrities, working with executives, and it really came down to credibility. What I was doing more than anything else in coaching them was making them more credible or appearing more credible for their audience. So that was the genesis of the entire project.
When Stephen
yeah, Rebecca, to you.
When Stephen decided to incorporate some academic influence into the book, he stumbled upon me.
I sought her out.
He sought me out. And part of the irony of that is he wanted to work with someone who was geographically desirable, i.e. close by, so that this could be done face to face. We live on opposite sides of the Santa Monica Bay, but relatively close. And we met, we connected in late February and had lunch in very early March of 2020 and did not meet again face to face until May 10th, 2021. So this is a Zoom book. But what we discovered about each other was we have a similar voice, we have similar perspectives, we have different backgrounds and different skill sets. And what we wanted to create was a book that had depth beyond do this, don't do that. There's lots of communication books around that. But as an academic, I feel that the research is in itself very credible, but the communication research doesn't get into the popular business press. HBR doesn't write about communication journal articles. And that's really unfortunate because we know so much about organizations and people and communication and how all of that integrates into employee engagement and productivity and the relationship between that and business success. And so we wanted this book to be grounded in the why of what we're recommending that people do. And so we created the assessment because we think it's important to understand how you communicate. It's not skill-based. It's really how you are innately as a communicator. And there's no goods or bads. Water's wet, rocks are hard, and that's just how you are. But with the workbook elements at the end of each chapter, we try to provide some guidelines for what's going to work for you and what maybe you want to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, what was incredible. Yeah, so sorry, I'm just going to jump in there. What was also interesting, sorry, Stephen, was the self-assessment questionnaire at the start, and I had to think really, really hard about that. Just to where do I sit? Not at all. Something like me, most like me. So it's good in terms of getting into and start to self-analyze. And you're right.
Ninder, did you
I
do
did quite. Yeah, I did quite a few of them, and it was it tested me quite a bit. I wasn't quite sure, and of course, the problem is you may think you are or not a great communicator, but it's how people perceive you. And I think that's what you say later on in the credible strategy. It's what people think of you. But I thought also during the book, and a lot of people, I was being very flippant when I said great leaders just by their presentation. But of course, there's more to it than just being able to present really well. So sorry, Steve, you were saying something.
That was exactly the point I was going to make, which was, isn't it interesting that the list of great communicators that you mentioned, Steve Jobs, Winston Churchill, Barack Obama, so different in style. They're not soapbox screaming from the top of the mountain. They have their own sort of cachet or credibility or whatever it is that they are bringing to the table that goes beyond their skills. They are bringing aura. They're bringing a presence to everything that they say. And what makes them great is the sense that we listen. We hang on every word because we believe that there is something even more than the words that they're saying that we have to pay attention to.
And of course, the greatest one, the greatest quote is, of course, I have a dream. And that's just gone down in history as these sort of key words of communication, of setting a vision and saying to people, just follow me, which is quite an astonishing skill to have. Rebecca, just picking something up, did you, and I might, and forgive me, I might have misread it. You used the word innate. Does that mean it can't be taught?
There are elements of communication, obviously, that can be taught. I was a presentation trainer at a big aerospace company early in my career. I was a debate coach. Certainly there are things we can teach people. But as you approach communication, you just are. So for example, one of our dimensions is how you prepare for communication. You're either meticulous, meaning you're very detail oriented, you prepare, you research, you need to think about things, or you're holistic, which means, you're comfortable winging it. You're looking at the big picture and such like that. You're hardwired that way. Stephen is very meticulous. It was fabulous to have that element in our partnership, as was our research assistant. I am the consummate winger. And I'm looking at the big picture, and I am not going to go into something with a whole long list of things. When Stephen and I work together, we have learned, I think by talking. And we will have a meeting and we're thinking about a particular topic. I'm talking about it, whatever, Stephen's taking notes. And I mean, we're interacting. It's not, a monologue. But then when we need to sort of think about what are we going to do out of this, Stephen goes and processes. He needs to think, he wants to think about it. He may want to research a little bit. That's just how we are. I cannot be that way. I've tried. I am bad at it. So there are some things that we have a personality. We are just innately this way. We think that it's important to know that, to understand what your strengths are and how your strengths can sometimes be liabilities. So I know, for example, that there are times when I really need to prepare. I can't wing it. I've got to put in that detailed time. But it's not my normal mode. Stephen can wing it. He knows so much. He's got so much knowledge and experience, but he likes to get all of his ducks in a row. And I don't care if my ducks are flying or swimming or fishing. And so I don't think that can be taught, because when you try to be who you are not, you're not credible, you're not authentic, and people sense that.
So are you saying, I'm not saying you're saying, there's a general perception that extroverts make great communicators and introverts don't?
No, not at all. In fact, so we have a chapter in the book called 6 to an 8. And basically it gets into the concept of how do you rate yourself, or how do you think you want to be perceived as a communicator or as a presenter? And most of us have had clients come to us and say, oh, make me a 10, make me Tony Robbins, make me Steve Jobs. The reality is everybody can't be that way, and everybody shouldn't be that way, because it is their authenticity that is what you're trying to connect with the audience. And that may not be a great orator, but that's okay, because you may be a quieter person that people just want to hear every word. You may speak slower. You may have, great eye contact, and that makes you that makes you a great communicator in your own way. And that's the best you're going to be anyway. So you have to really come to grips with that.
I was
Ninder,
interested, Stephen. Sorry, I was Rebecca, I'll jump in. I was with a friend of mine, another podcast. I'm just picking up your point there, Stephen. And he went to do a pitch. It was a tech conference. And as did the pitch, one of the judges came up and said, no, you've got it completely wrong. You should be doing it this way, this way, this way, this way. So when he delivered it, it wasn't him. And the pitch bombed. And somebody came up to him, another judge, and said, I don't think that was you presenting that pitch. Who were you trying to be? Of course, he'd been told. And then when he delivered the next time, he was hugely successful. So you're absolutely right. And I think Rebecca just said that as well, is that you should be who you are when you communicate, because someone is going to catch you out soon, you trying to be somebody you're not. So Rebecca, sorry, I interrupted you.
well, I was just going to build on what Stephen said. Authenticity is inherently engaging and persuasive. So you don't have to be all over the stage. You don't have to have lots of verve in your delivery. You have to be authentically you. And although a lot of the leaders that you described were great orators,
That's right.
not all are. Harry Truman was a pretty successful president, and he was pure Midwest guy. He did not speak with great, oration. And I'm sure you have people in Great Britain who you could come up with examples like that, that unfortunately I cannot. But you want to present your authentic self. And that means, as Stephen said, not trying to be like somebody else. But the reason all of this matters is that your credibility, your audience's perceptions of you all lie within that audience. We say that their perception is your reality. Credibility lies in the listener. I may think I'm really credible. I have this background and this experience and whatever, but if you are not perceiving me as credible for whatever reason, my credibility capital has gone to zero. And so it's really important that you understand that it's really not about you. It's really about them. And I think for a lot of leaders, that's really hard, because I've worked with a lot of CEOs, and all except for, I think, one or two, their ego preceded them into the room. And that's because, they have they've always been the smartest bear in the room. They've been able to, achieve this, that, and the other. But the way communication intersects with leadership and success, however you define success, is that these people tend to think they have lots of levers that they can move to create the success that they want. There's operational levers, there's financial levers, there's marketing levers and such like that. But in reality, there's only one lever, and that's communication, because none of those other levers move. But communication is like water to the goldfish. Goldfish doesn't have any concept of water until it's not there or it's gone bad. And so what we try to do in this book is raise the profile, if you will, of communication and how it is so intimately and intricately connected to the way we relate to other people in all manners of our lives, but in this book, particularly around business.
So how do you get credibility capital? And then how do you measure you've got it? And once you work that out, how do you keep it? So how do you do that?
Stephen,
So
you want to
often,
take that one?
so often keeping it is the hardest part, because people do have a tendency to give you the benefit of the doubt if you have achieved a certain level of success or perceived success. But then it's sort of, your credibility is kind of, it's yours to lose at that particular moment. You come in as 100 and you can quickly go down to 50 very fast if you are not demonstrating the characteristics of, why you rose in the first place. What was your background? What was, how did you deal with people? How were you regarded as a business person? I mean, that is what you're all bringing to the table. Now you have to figure out how to sort of maintain it, especially if you're starting a new position in a new environment with potentially a new communications culture. And if you're just kind of feeling your way through how to be an effective leader and not understanding the culture that you're walking into, that is the greatest threat to your credibility.
Yeah,
So sorry, go on, Rebecca.
We came up with the concept of credibility capital as a way of helping people think about what goes into that. So we build credibility when we relate to people, when we do what we say we are going to do, when we listen to other people and show them that we are connecting and paying attention. And so we build credibility in little increments, if you will, as to how we build that capital. When you don't do what you say, you decrement your capital. When you don't listen to people and you go off in a different tangent and whatever, you sort of lose a little bit more credibility. But we tend to think about credibility as something that's innate and inherent in us. In reality, my credibility, Stephen's credibility, lies in your perceptions of us, Ninder. So you've read the book, you like the book, you like the concepts of the book. If in our conversation today, we violate, if you will, what you saw in the book, our credibility goes down. We started with high credibility because you read the book, you liked the book, you were intrigued by our backgrounds. And so the concept of credibility capital is a way to think about, how do I bank my credibility? And how can I build that credibility in relation to people, and what will get me in trouble? And so one of the things that you'll see in those workbook elements at the end of the chapters is, do this and your credibility's gonna go down. Do that and you're probably going to find that your credibility, increases.
Yeah, I thought there's a great chapter on it. I think it's page 18, when you talk about how you receive information and how you react to receiving information. Because your credibility, you're absolutely right, in the eyes of other people, if you don't listen to anybody, they're not going to have much credibility if you don't listen at all. Or when you negotiate and listening, you're listening to something else and they're saying something else. And that's where the credibility does become an issue. So how would I know? You gave a great example of how you worked out what I think of you, because I've read the book. But how does an executive or an entrepreneur runs his own business? Is it through position that you have some credibility gap? Is it through the success of your business if you're an entrepreneur? And depending on the level of success, that's your credibility. Is that the benchmark you use?
Depends on the situation, first of all.
Okay.
So in the example you gave of that entrepreneur who was trying to be like somebody else and did not. So he walked in with credibility, because otherwise he wouldn't be presenting
Yeah.
his pitch, right? So they read his proposal, they saw his business plan, whatever. They're looking to see that he's going to be able to perform as promised, if you will, in the pitch. When he tried to do it in a different way, he lost credibility because he lost authenticity. And it's like, I mean, did he really put this together? Does he really understand this? I'm starting to doubt his capabilities, and that brought down his credibility. In leadership, so leaders think that they are the end all and the be all, and they forget that all the people around them, and you can, whatever angle you're looking at, customers, suppliers, employees, funders, whatever, are looking at what you do, how you do it, what you say, and the way you say it, and that you follow through. Most leaders in big organizations where there is not a good feeling about the CEO from rank and file employees is because they don't, as we say colloquially, walk the talk. I worked with a CEO, a fabulous communicator. I mean, I could put him up in front of anybody, and he was really engaging, and he had that spark. And he always said, I want pushback. I don't want yes men or women. I want you to push back. Yeah, well, you did that at your peril. Because you'd sit in a meeting and somebody would say, well, and you could tell he wasn't interested, and he was making a note. There was a little checkbox next to your name. That hurts your credibility. And so leaders don't think enough about how they are being perceived, how they are being judged, and I mean that, kind of in quotes.
Yeah.
But how people are looking at actions and words and approach. I mean, one of the ways a lot of leaders lose credibility is policies. I mean, if you put in a lot of restrictions on people, you lose credibility because that tells them you don't trust them. One thing companies do, Steve and I have talked about this a lot, is somebody does something stupid, okay, and creates a problem. And so now we don't ever want that to happen again. So we're going to put in policies and procedures that make sure that really stupid thing doesn't happen again. As opposed to saying, hey, somebody did this, it created this problem, don't do that. And because it probably would never happen again. So because companies don't trust their people enough, people don't trust their leaders, and credibility and trust are, inherently connected.
The most credible,
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
The most credible communicators are those who really understand the motivations of those who are you're trying to speak to. And that is a very difficult thing, especially for leaders who theoretically are put in those positions because they are there to lead and not there to listen. But what they forget is that it doesn't work to scream in an empty hall. And that's what ends up happening. If they do not show the connection between those who are receiving the message and how it affects them as stakeholders, then they quickly lose that credibility and their ability to lead. It's actually pretty simple. The problem is most leaders are insulated and they either have yes people or they don't care to listen to those who have valid opinions. It doesn't matter where you are on the corporate ladder, that opinion has to be considered. It doesn't have to mean you have to follow all of their advice, but you do have to take that into consideration and allow that to build into the way you convey your message.
So if you just walked into, yes, sorry, go on.
No, because I want to build on something Stephen said that I think is really important. When we talk about great orators, we're not talking about leaders. They may have been leaders. So when we talk about the Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech, we also have to look at who he was, what his relationship was with all of those thousands of people, what his reputation was, what he had been doing all along. And then, of course, he created a really fabulous speech because he said, I have a dream, not I have an idea.
Yep.
But leaders don't have to be great orators. A lot of them aren't. We tend to put those two things together.
That's right.
And sometimes they are, but this may be a little questionable of an example, but Donald Trump was not a classically good speaker, but to those who bought into his perspective, who aligned with the way he explained to them what was wrong and why things weren't working for him, he was incredibly persuasive. To those who didn't buy his innate premise, he was a joke and probably not a great leader. But there's no question that he had and still has quite a hold on a significant percentage of the US, voting adult population. And so the challenge is it's not simple. Communication is messy, and there are no good formulas. That when Stephen talks about from a 6 to an 8, what people are asking for is, give me the formula, teach me how to do the formula, and I'm going to be fill in the blank. Winston Churchill, Obama, Trump, and it doesn't work that way. Human beings don't like random, right? That's why COVID made everybody so crazy, because there was so much ambiguity, so much we didn't know. And COVID itself seemed extremely random, and who it decided to get really sick and, and all of those things. So when we look at how to be a good communicator, we want a guidebook, when in reality, it's not formulaic. It's highly personal. It is, sometimes magic happens and we don't know why. The I Have a Dream speech was one of those magical times. And who can say why? Part of it was the energy, part of it what had been going on before, part of it was the fact that protest, nothing like it had ever been seen. There were lots of things that went into creating that exceptional moment. And so we can't always plan for those things, but that's what people want. And so what we try to do in the book is help them understand that the magic is only internal. It's only when you're being authentic. It's only when you are being yourself. It's only when you are focused on the people you are speaking to or with or working with and not on yourself that people look at you as credible and trustworthy and engaging.
So how would you then, if that's the case, how would you assess whether you fit into the culture of an organization? How would you know I fit? How would you know how to communicate? When do you know whether you're in congruence with the organization or not? How would you do that? You walk in, how do I communicate? Are there any telltale signs?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are visible things that you can see. There's a dress code that people will follow. There's furnishings, the way the office is laid out. So those are tangible things that you should process. There is what we call promoted, which is what companies espouse to be, what they, what their philosophy is. Sometimes it's in their advertising, sometimes it's just in their company brochures or on their websites, but you can get a feel for what they think they want to be. And then the other is unspoken. It's an assumption that you do have to make based on the knowledge that you have and what you bring to the table and the way you perceive all of that information. But that you have to look at it as a science experiment in a sense of bringing in all the elements together and really understanding or attempting to understand what that culture is that you're walking into. Dress code is such an interesting one these days because it used to be, and it's changing. I mean, some of that is COVID and some of this informality, and people would say, well, at least, dress up for the part. Don't worry about it. But if you dress too far up, you have alienated yourself and dug yourself a bit of a hole that you need to now dig out of to prove that you are worth listening to or to be led, because it's a disconnect. It's almost insulting to those who you are trying to speak to, because you're basically saying, I'm not respecting the culture in which I have come into.
But how do you then, everything you've just said, I completely understand. You join a business during COVID, you don't know the symbols, you don't know the dress code, because actually you're in front of a screen. People are dressed as they want to dress. There's no offices, you can't see anything going on. You've just joined them. COVID hits. What do you do then? How do you assess what that organizational or communication culture is?
Oh, there is absolutely an entire sector of the working force that is at a tremendous disadvantage because they have not had this opportunity to understand the culture, to be with the people in what you call the water cooler informal conversation. The Zoom structure is so staid and almost like you are watching a broadcast of somebody as opposed to who they are. We like to say that the only genuine moments in a Zoom conversation are the 3 to 4 minutes before the meeting is supposed to start. And when people are kind of coming together, that's when they don't feel like the spotlight is on them, they might maybe have to let it down a bit and, talk about their families or talk about what, all the stresses that they're under or whatever it is. But as soon as that light comes on and it's 10 a.m. or whatever it is, and you're expected to perform, your persona changes. I mean, you are a different person. So to answer your question, there's no magic pill in this area. There's a lot of feeling in the dark of how to fit in. And frankly, we don't know if those people will ever really fit in the same way. I mean, as Rebecca just said, people hate uncertainty. Well, the only people that hate uncertainty more is business. Business hates uncertainty. And that has been the knife in the back of so many businesses during COVID is the stop-start uncertainty of the moment. And we've all read lots of articles in the Wall Street Journal about, how things should be and how we should act. There's still a lot of trial and error going on during this process, and people are still feeling their way through all of it. And some may survive and some may not. There is not necessarily only a happy ending to this story.
But,
A question
but there,
to, sorry, go on, Rebecca.
but there are hints. I mean, Stephen is absolutely right that once things start getting back to normal, what normal might or might not be, then your what you experience may be different. But in the Zoom world, there are certain things you can sense about the organization. How much participation is there? Is it one person basically broadcasting? Is there interaction? Are there ways for people to make suggestions, ask questions? That is still there. That'll give you an idea of maybe not the entire organization, but your work unit. But it's also going to be really interesting as companies start to open up and people start to go back to work. We think there's going to be a lot of hybrid.
Yeah.
But the culture that existed in organizations in January of 2020 will not be the culture of organizations in January of 2023. There will just be change. People's expectations will be different. Employees, are used to, I mean, a lot of this is office workers, people, who are not on a manufacturing floor or something like that. But people have had a lot of autonomy and they've been able to get a lot of work done. And what's going to happen when now you're back in the office and your boss is, down the hall, and, you don't have 6 or 8 hours a day, where you are doing whatever your work is, you're on email and this, it's just going to be different. And so I think people have to be very aware of all of those elements. And the other part of it is the opposite side of what Stephen was talking about is you have to understand what kind of a culture you want to work in. Maybe you don't want a highly autonomous workplace. You want a little more structure. You want a little more rigor. Maybe you want more interaction. You want to work in teams and such. So the more you understand about how you like to work, the more you can look at how an organization behaves, which is culture, how they communicate, how transparent are they, how collaborative are they, and then you can say, yeah, this is the kind of organization I know I thrive in, or yeah, this is the kind of organization I don't like. I was in a large consulting firm for 2 years. As I told my students, just because you have an itch doesn't mean you have to scratch it. And one of the things I discovered, because I was used to working in teams and things when I had been in a different part of the corporate world, at least in this consulting company, there was a lot of internal competition because there were only so many partnerships and only so many senior roles. And so actually, the culture was very competitive internally. I did not thrive in that in that kind of organization. So you want to now, could I have known that? Yeah, because if I had paid closer attention to the recruiting process, I would have known that that was a major underpinning in the way they behaved. But I didn't. And I didn't even think about it until 2 years later. So the more you are aware of what's going on, pay attention to the way people communicate, pay attention to Are questions welcome? What kinds of questions are welcome? How interested is the organization in sharing information? There is a lot you can learn. Some of it, as Stephen said, going online and such. But when they have all of those professed values that Stephen was talking about, all too often, those live only on parchment. And so you want to pay really close attention to, does the culture, the behavior, the approaches, the rewards match what's on that parchment? And I would argue all too often they don't match. And that's why you have unengaged, cynical, I'm looking for the next job employees.
So the challenge going forward, Stephen was talking about the hybrid system, people coming in 2 days a week, 1 day a week, working from home, coming in. How does the communication channels and the communication style now have to change? So what the leaders can't do what they used to do. You were just saying that a second. They can't do what they used to do. So half the people will be in, half the people won't be in. How does a leader understand how to now come up with a new comms sort of formula for these various factions in, out, and it's just never going to be the same?
Well, here's a dirty secret, and that is a lot of it's going to be trial and error.
Okay.
There is not going to be one book ever written. As I say, we didn't even try, but there will not be a book that will tell you how to navigate hybrid workforces in a post-COVID world and be accurate and apply to all the situations that you are in. Great leaders have to be flexible. They have to listen to their employees. And when I don't just mean sort of like that monthly suggestion box kind of listening. We're talking about very active weekly check-ins with your immediate lieutenants, and really getting a sense of what is going on out there. Because without this sort of, I guess gossip is a bad thing in general, but gossip has a positive side, and that is it does take the temperature of the room. And without any of that informal communication, you have to double down on really listening and seeing what's working, and be willing to make a left-hand turn when you thought you were going to make a right-hand turn about an individual or about a particular department.
Stephen,
we wrote a recent article, Fast Company, I think is what it's in, about having what we call facilitated conversations. And it's a different way for managers to connect with employees, to really understand what life looks like from the employee's perspective. And it's a much different kind of participative, collaborative conversation that the post-COVID workforce will really benefit from.
I think, Stephen, just picking up what you said, I was speaking to a senior partner yesterday, and what he said, just picking up your comments, he said he's had to fine-tune his other skills, because he used to rely a lot on looking through his eyes, with his eyes, on body behavior. So he could see where somebody was because of the way their body language.
Sure.
But because of Zoom, he's having to now look at other things, like you said, double. Yeah. He's had to employ to a greater extent his other skills to make up for the fact that he can't read your body language because of Zoom.
Yep.
So he said he's had to change. He's had to look at people, ask deeper questions, think a bit more, rather than just rely, as in the past, on body language. Couple of questions, and then we'll wrap up. Time is flying, and my pizza should be on its way soon. Now, we live in a digital world, and you now see people deciding who a great communicator is by the number of followers, the number of likes. This person must be a great influencer, must be a great leader, great communicator. Look how many people engage with them. Through social media, suddenly has emerged the personal brand. So I was interviewing Mr. Foster, Joel Foster. He's in the Business Influencer magazine, and he founded Reebok. And he said, when I was building the business, nobody had heard the word personal brand. It just didn't exist. You start Reebok, you work for Reebok, you push Reebok. And by the way, I'm Joel Foster, but who cares? It's Reebok, Reebok, Reebok. He said, today the world is different. So Mr. Cook, who runs Apple, has 12 million followers, Tim Cook. Apple only has 6 million. So people go, wow, he must be a great communicator. Look how many people follow him. So I suppose the question now is, the world has changed. Social media has changed everything. Does everybody need a personal brand? Do you have to keep communicating with the world incessantly on as many channels as you can? Is that what brings you credibility? Is that how you measure it? Oh, I have more followers than Mr. X or Mrs. X. I must be more credible. And of course, in some instances, some of the influencers people publicly trash because there's no talent behind them. So it's a difficult position, and I'm going to leave this question with you. So entrepreneurs feel they have to because they're the face of the business. So my question is, do they? And actually, do employees even need to think about building a personal brand? So you talk about credibility, you talk about being credible, you talk about having credibility capital. Does a personal brand fit into that?
So let's put the social media issue aside for just 1 second. And that is,
yep. Okay.
Yes, everybody needs a personal brand. And if you don't do it yourself, the people will do it for you.
Yeah.
So if you are not proactive in the
Yeah.
way you want to be perceived, just like a bottle of ketchup in a way, and people really recoil. And this is a fight that I know I've had for at least 15 years with people that I train, because when I start to use the word brand, they go, oh, no, I'm not a product. Yeah. I'm not something that can be bought and sold that way. Well, here is this little secret. Brand is meaning. That's what a brand really is. It's meaning. It's what does it mean to you when you see that brand? Because that bottle of ketchup, that Heinz label, or that Pepsi can, immediately when you see that brand, it evokes an entire world that they have spent millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and years to create for you. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to devote that much time and that much money into your personal brand, but the reality is, again, people are looking for differentiators. They're looking to survive in their businesses. They're looking to be able to explain what makes them valuable in the workplace. And the quickest, best, and most efficient way to do that is to develop your personal brand.
That everybody has a brand, whether they have created it or not. Because a brand is an expectation, right? As you know, as Stephen said. And so you actually have a brand, whether you think of it or not. We've all worked with people that we know will always be late. They will always come in just under the wire, or maybe, you know, a little bit later. Their work is sloppy. That's the brand. Now, did they want to create that brand? Probably not. Did they realize that that's the brand that they have created for themselves? Probably not. So there's a chapter in the book about personal branding. And the idea there is to take control of your brand, because a brand is a promise that has to be fulfilled, right? And you create that promise either unconsciously or by taking control of it.
And so if Stephen, if I come back to you, I know you said don't look at social media, let's put that aside. But to what extent has that impacted though? I love the word when you said, well, if you don't, somebody else will, because you lose that power because other people will create that brand for you with whatever they say. So it gets more complicated because with social media, you have a personal brand, you work for the business or you run your own business, and it gets incredibly complicated. Do you push your own personal brand as opposed to the business you run? Do you push the business as the crikey? I mean, where do you start? Where do you stop? Any advice?
Well, you have to look at your social presence as an extension of your brand. You have to be a little more methodical about what you put out to make sure that that expression is, again, what you want it to be. Because unfortunately, when you start to deal with masses, the tail begins to wag the dog, and you start to do things that will only raise your popularity or your likes, and that erodes really from what you're trying to convey in the first place. So I'm a little more judicious about the way I think social media can be used most effectively, because again, as you say, just having a sheer number of followers doesn't necessarily make you more credible. Yeah. So you really have to say, it's like, what is that worth to me? How do I translate popularity into credibility? And sometimes that they don't always work so well together. I find it so interesting how the word influencer has evolved and become this sort of massive buzzword everywhere. Right. I mean, it's bordering on jumping the shark, I think, a little bit because of overuse. But when you just start to think about the word itself, it's not even a leadership quality in a sense. You're just sort of pushing somebody along that you hope will like what you're trying to sell them, or how you want to direct their interest. I find it fascinating because it is not such a definitive term. It is kind of a soft push. And again, if you think of your social media as just that extension of who you are and not so much who you are, then you will ultimately be more effective.
Final question. What can entrepreneurs, business leaders learn? So here's some recommendations or piece of advice, please. From your work, working with celebrities, politicians, CEOs of big corporations, big businesses, big consultants. 3 tips, please, of what you would recommend in building your credibility, being better at communication, and generally making sure everything is consistent, because I think consistency comes into it. If you're consistent in your communication. So if I was to pitch to 3 of you, the 2 of you, 3 pieces of advice that you would give. It's a great book, by the way, and people should read the book without a shadow of a doubt. But if I was to spin and say you've got 3 pieces of, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to become a credible communicator?
Actually, you said it. The number one thing is to be consistent. Walk the talk. Do what you said you were going to do. That is probably the number one element. And understand that people are paying attention to whether you do that or not. So that would be my first advice. Stephen, you want to give the second?
Sure. And a lot of this comes from my time working with actors who people believe are really great communicators because they're high profile. it's actually in their humility where they are the most genuine. And it's when they come up with a story, because great storytelling is actually, we didn't talk too much about that, but great storytelling is really the key to great communicating. It is in the ability to find the stories that convey who you are. And it's not even, it's the story itself, but it's also in the selection of that story. It's why did you choose that particular story to convey who you are, and why somebody should want to either see your performance or listen to what you have to say.
Stephen, let me jump in there. Now, a lot of people will say, I don't have any stories. Oh, what can you possibly say? I've got a story. Because when you say that to people, there must be something interesting. I have no stories to tell you, they say. So how do you respond to that?
Well, we do have a chapter in the book of sort of how to find stories that are true to who you are. And it does require some homework. You know, people don't like to work. I hate to say it sometimes, but we go through a process in the book. We use the archetypes, the 12 archetypes, in which it's a great way to start to kind of figure out, are you more the magician? Are you more the hero? Are you more the explorer? If you can begin with that as a way in, then all of a sudden, I think your life experiences will start to come into focus a little bit more. And you'll start to say, you know what, that time when that happened is probably a good example of how I was really a transformative person. I was a magician and I was able to kind of change somebody's life. And as soon as you get to that, now you're on the beginning of sort of finding your story.
I'm not going to go into it, but there is a sense of some people, imposter syndrome. We won't go to that, but there's just, but great, thanks. And so everybody should refer to that chapter. Rebecca, sorry, you were about to say something.
What I wanted to say is our conversation today is a great example of storytelling. In the course of our conversations, when you were talking about that I'm assuming young man who tried to be somebody that he wasn't.
That's right. That's right.
Stephen's told stories. I've told stories. They're experiential. The one thing you have to make sure about when you're telling a story is that it relates to the situation.
Well, look, it's been fantastic. I've heard a knock on the door. I think my pizza's arrived. So you've heard about my pizza, but let me just quickly catch a couple of things. So today's been really interesting. So I think when you talk about communication, and I make the point to start, people think only about how good you are at articulating your point or being able to verbalize what you say. But there's a lot more to it, as you've picked up. You've talked about credibility capital, how you measure that, how you get to that, and how you keep it. We've talked about how the digital age just confuses things, makes it more difficult, but you've got to put that aside and still think about your communication. We've talked about organizational culture. We've talked about hybrid working and how, there's no correct answer to this because it's something we've hit for the first time. We've talked about personal branding, again, coming back to credibility capital. We've talked about storytelling. We've talked about being consistent. We've talked about having a sense of humility and to be able to tell a story. We've told that when you take the whole, and it's a big area, it's communication. And I think just to start, I think that's a great place to start. And I'll tell you what I liked was a lot of tips, but also a lot of questions. And I did a lot of scribbling, by the way. You can see a lot of scribbling there.
Love that.
I could have chatted for hours, to be honest with you. But there's a lot of self-analysis where you ask yourself questions. And I think you've said it actually, which is it's not easy. There's no one book that can answer something, but it's a great place to start and ask yourself those questions. Because I think communication is today and will always be a key differentiator in your career and in your business, and I think in life. So thank you for your time. It's been fantastic. I apologize if I've cut you off sometimes, either you, Rebecca, or Stephen. Actually,
We're
doing these
used to
things
it.
digitally.
No, it was
Yeah,
great.
it's
Thank you.
It's
It's fine.
doing things digitally is blinking difficult. And then across the pond, there's that gap as well in the digital signal. So you don't know whether that's a gap or whether someone's about to say something. So I apologize for that. Thank you very much. Now, I am looking forward to, and by the way, this magazine is now available in the States, in Barnes & Noble, all 107 stores. And I'm looking forward to an article in issue 9, issue 8 just coming out, featuring your take on incredible communication. I'm looking forward to that and placing it in the next issue of the Business Influencer. But thank you very much again for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Enjoy your evening and your pizza.
Yeah.
And I'm off to have my pizza. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.